I want to keep developing my painting skills and achieve a certain look with my paintings, and I love doing these monochromatic portraits, but I feel like I'm coming to a point where I want to develop my style further. I'm searching for more looseness, more paint strokes, and I just want to generally develop my skill and be more versatile and learn new things. And to do this, I need practice. So let me take you along with me on a practice session, and I'm going to show you what I did this weekend in order to keep pushing my skill set. I'm not gonna lie, I feel a bit uncomfortable showing this art that isn't really to the standard that I want to put out, but I've decided I'm gonna let this sphere go in the name of showing more of my learning process and how I teach myself new skills. I'm gonna preface the video by saying that I'm gonna be heavily critiquing what I painted and my whole process. Like, I'm going to sound negative at certain points about my painting in this video, and I just want to say that it comes from a place of love and reflection. I'm the kind of person that really wants real feedback, and I am very real with myself, and I don't take that as a bad thing. It helps me to say what doesn't work. So hopefully it's not annoying to hear so much critique. Just know that it's really helpful for me to reflect on my art and not have to be super positive about everything I create, especially not in a practice session like this one. So that's just something to keep in mind while you're listening to me ramble on throughout the video. So I had a free weekend and I thought, let me do an intensive painting session over the 2 days. And in order to practice looseness, which was the main thing I wanted to achieve, I set out to do quick painting sketches using only one color and this watercolor technique where you start with a light wash and build from there. And I ended up doing 19 portraits in 2 days. And honestly, I feel like I learned so much about my artistic approach and process. I'm really excited to share it with you, as well as share the mistakes I made and the ugly paintings I made and what they taught me. So I feel like I started strong. I was really in the zone with the first portrait and I loved the looser marks and contrast I achieved. I had started with purple, which is a color I'm familiar with using in my portraits. But in the next couple of portraits, I realized I was not getting the values right. I went in way too dark, way too soon, and I lost some of that contrast and layering. And normally when I paint with gouache, I'm used to white, so I can push and pull the paint and shape it, and if I go in too dark, I can make it light again. But with this technique, as I was just using one color, and in order to be quick, I realized I wasn't paying attention enough to the value from the start, and it took me a while to get to really be able to hit the values right later on. So from this first page, I was really learning how it was beneficial to become really attuned to how light or dark something is in the subject from the start and build slowly from there. I'm so drawn to this pink color, it's so beautiful, so I picked a really gorgeous reference photo, but again, I was having issues with going in too dark and not building the layers slowly, so I think she ended up looking a bit flat overall, and I tried to lift some of the paint with tissue, which did work a bit, and the great thing about doing these with gouache is that it reactivates, so you can lift the color a bit. I was really trying to focus on not taking ages though with these portraits. I actually set a timer for 25 minutes each, and I had to keep reminding myself that this was just an exercise. I think my perfectionist tendencies sometimes don't allow me to fully embrace practicing and playing with art and being okay with the outcome not looking amazing, but doing it for the sake of getting better and achieving an overall goal of pushing my style or developing. So it was really good that I did this. Before we continue, I want to thank the sponsors of this video, FlexiSpot, who recently sent me their E7L shaped desk to try out, and it's the perfect addition to my studio space. I'm using it not only for my editing and my admin work and the days I work from home with my job, but also for painting as well. It's super sturdy, it takes up to 355 pounds, and it doesn't budge, which is perfect for when I record my art from my canvas tripod, which sits on my desk, so I don't get any shaking from the table. I love that I can use one side of the table for painting and the other side for editing. I don't have to move stuff around. And since using FlexiSpot, I actually have a different desk from them, which I've used for a while now. I just can't get used to other desks, so I love the option of standing or sitting depending on my mood and how tired I am. I just feel like it's done wonders for my posture too. And I always love the addition of a USB port so I can charge my stuff. It's just really maximized my studio space. There's just so much space on the actual desk where I can fit everything that I do. So definitely check out the link in the description box for more information and an exclusive promo code that you can use. And thank you so much, FlexiSpot, for sponsoring. Okay, let's get back to the practice session. So I decided to stay with the pink for this next portrait and really work on value. So I was very much trying to be slower with building up the different layers of the face, but I still didn't feel like I was achieving what I wanted. She still seemed a bit too dimensional to me, and I just feel like I wasn't achieving a good range, which resulted in some flatness and not enough form building. And looking back on it now, I think what was happening was that I wasn't layering enough, which meant I was not building out all the different planes of the face, which resulted in that more flat look. And my usual portraits look really built out and dimensional because I layer so much and there are so many different planes of the face that I capture with different color values. But the flatness in these portraits was coming from not having that range, I guess. And I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back on the footage, it really began to click. So then I went back to the color purple because I felt more comfortable with this color, and I thought, let me just boost myself with a bit of confidence using this color. But for this portrait, there was just something going on that wasn't working. I feel like I was over blending, and it was something I really wanted to move away from, that over blended look. I wanted the loose and visible paint strokes, but I was gravitating towards creating smooth gradients and blending everything, and I was getting so annoyed because it's not the style I want to do. And I think also that not allowing the paint to dry was making everything run into itself, which wasn't helping, but I made that realization a lot later. I actually am learning a lot from reviewing the footage as well. I think my annoyance that I was feeling throughout some of these portraits was coming from a gap between my skill and vision. Have you ever heard of that? When you have an artistic vision that you want to achieve, but your skill set isn't quite there yet. So you're more prone to feeling frustrated. And I think that's kind of where I was or am at. And so I'm really glad that I'm working on it. So overall, she had a bit more dimension for sure, but it wasn't the style that I was trying to achieve, and she was a bit too blended for my liking. And then it all culminated in this orange portrait, which was a mess. The proportions were all wrong. I felt like her face was so flat. And then because the proportions were wrong, I kept trying to reshape her features and it all became a soupy mess, which I tried to fix with white so I could build out her profile again, but it was a mess. And instead of moving on, I got a piece of paper and I started again, this time with an angled brush to help me think more about shapes versus falling into that over blending trap. At this point, I had a mini realization that I was being held back by my need to paint too realistically, and I realized that I gravitate a lot towards realism in my illustrations, and I'm not even talking about these portraits right now, I'm talking about my general illustration style. I just think that it's holding me back because I want to be expressive and loose and capture the essence of things and people and faces and places, but I always seem to fall back on getting caught up on the realistic aspect. And even though my illustrations aren't the genre of realism, like you can tell they're illustrations, I think I'm still tethered to realism in some kind of way. And so I do think it's holding me back. And that's what I kind of realized throughout this process as well. Anyway, I quite like how this second attempt turned out. Quite simple, but the simplicity really worked. So in this next portrait, this is one of my least favorites actually. However, the process was getting closer to a more successful process for me, even though I didn't love the outcome. And the reason why I say this is because firstly, I concentrated on the values more and slowly building from light to dark. But I really also focused on the marks I was making on the page and how they were coming together. And I realized at this point also that painting faces that are older, so had more lines and different planes of the face, was easier because I was able to have a more looser approach in painting them versus kind of capturing a younger face that is smoother and has less angles. Like, I was definitely feeling like I was capturing older faces or more mature faces much more successfully than the younger faces, and you'll see that a bit more later on too. This realization that I was liking painting faces that were more mature helped me choose the next reference photo for the next portrait. And I decided to do these next pages in blue. And at this point, this face that I'm painting here was my favorite face I had done thus far. And it was just confirming how much I loved painting and seeing the brush strokes coming together and that looser approach. I just felt like it was all coming together so well. I felt really confident doing this portrait and using the negative space and just focusing on those paint strokes coming together. And I just kept thinking, this is how I want to approach all my illustrations, with this looseness. I like my style of painting generally, but I just really want to push it in this direction. And the process for this specific portrait was really helping me understand that. It's the perfect example of clicking with a process regardless of the outcome, which is what I feel this challenge really did for me. I wasn't fixated or as fixated on the outcome as I usually am. So I could have kept working on him. I don't feel like it was fully finished, but because of time, I had to move on to the next, which is great because I'm here to learn about the process and I needed to experience a lot of processes. So I moved on to the next portrait, which I feel like I messed up because I was painting in the middle of the page, which kind of ruined the face. It looks warped in this footage because of the angle, and the seams of the sketchbook made the paint run a bit, which kind of ruined it. Like, the eye messed up. I did bring in the white paint to try and fix it a bit, but anyway, overall I wasn't loving it, and I was trying to focus on that looseness that I was so loving about the previous portrait, but I feel like it was kind of messy, and the photo was of a younger girl, but I feel like I didn't capture the essence of her youth. Like, the paint strokes kind of aged her, and I also wasn't being patient with allowing the paint to dry between layers, so I was getting a lot of that blooming effect, which was resulting in a bit more of a kind of muddied gradient look. This next portrait felt really flat for me. I wasn't achieving the depth I wanted, and I could blame it on the reference photo because her face is very evenly lit in the photo, but I'm not going to blame it on the reference photo because that's not an excuse to not achieve depth. And I realized that yes, painting portraits with light and dark contrast and different grooves and wrinkles and shapes on the face is super interesting to do and easier to do because of those things, but I want to be able to paint any type of portrait. Which brought me to my second realization of the challenge, which was basically that I want to be able to successfully paint portraits no matter how good or not good the reference photo is. I want to be able to capture someone's essence and not have to rely on a perfect reference photo. I think this speaks to the whole concept of me getting lost in trying to perfectly capture what I see versus trying to illustrate someone or something and capture their essence with my style. So to challenge myself in capturing the essence of someone without a perfect reference photo, I chose to do a baby who had smoother skin and no angles, and you know, babies are just so round and smooth, and so being able to capture their youthfulness but still using loose strokes and marks on the page that are visible, and no like gradient blending or overworking the paint was going to be a challenge. And although this portrait isn't a masterpiece by any means, I do feel like I did capture that essence while still being quite loose. So it felt successful in that sense because of the intention that I had set out. And at this point, I also did take out my hairdryer between layers because I wanted to stick to the 25 minutes, and waiting around for the layers to dry just was getting annoying and not an option. And so again, in the spirit of the challenge I set myself, I sped up the process. But it's completely fine to wait and be slow with your process, by the way. It really was just because of this whole time crunch that I had. But I really needed the blooming of the paint to stop happening, so the hairdryer option was a good move. And then by this last portrait, I was losing steam a bit, so I didn't love the outcome so much, but I will acknowledge that I felt confident in my process, and I was beginning to see how I was bringing these lessons I was learning throughout into my approach. So again, another feeling of success because of the process itself. And I called it a day here. I began painting around 9ish that morning, and it was around 6ish when I stopped. Obviously I took a few breaks, but I was mainly just painting for those 9 hours or so, which felt really amazing actually, but I left it here for the day. The next day I had in my head that I wanted to try new colors, and so I began with this different shade of blue, and I chose a reference photo that I really liked. And I did like my approach with this portrait, but I do feel like there was something off about the proportions, and it's probably down to rushing and not spending enough time paying attention to the different proportions in my sketch. And this is kind of a pattern I was noticing with these quick studies. I don't think it's necessarily a goal of mine to become faster at painting per se, but I do think that accuracy does come from practicing under time constraints. I have heard from other illustrators that it is within your interest to become more speedy in your illustration process, just because of the nature of the work and making it as a commercial illustrator. You definitely do want to have a process that doesn't require you taking ages in completing a project. I was also thinking about illustrators that do live painting events, which really fascinate me because firstly, I feel like I would crumble under the pressure. Like, how do you paint live in front of people? But secondly, you have to be pretty quick because often these events are about painting guests or personalizing things with illustrations, and you have to get through various people. And so I'm fascinated by illustrators that can adapt their styles at these events to be able to create live. This page kind of went from bad to worse. I tried to make the pink happen again, but I was just not getting it. The proportions were all off on this face as well. And then I tried the green, and again, I don't think it was the green necessarily that didn't work, but I just wasn't getting the proportions right on these portraits, which was messing me up. And this is the first portrait where I combined a different colour. I added some blue to darken the values. I really liked the combination of the blue and green. I want to try that again, but yeah, it was just the building of the face that wasn't super successful on this one. And when I started to see that the face wasn't built out well, it doesn't matter how much I render it, I get discouraged because it just doesn't look right. For this tiny portrait in the corner, I used the same technique of mixing the purple to darken some of the values even more with the blue. This tiny last portrait I did like some of the paint strokes I was laying down, so I decided to do the same portrait but larger on the next page. Because I was getting really frustrated on that previous page of not getting the proportions right, I decided to slow it down a bit and take my time and focus on the sketch of this face and make sure I was really taking my time with laying down all the different layers and the brush strokes. And I do like how this portrait turned out overall. I mixed in some of the purple to deepen some of the areas with the blue, and I felt like going a bit slower helped me pay attention to the different brush strokes I was putting down. And overall, I felt like this portrait combined the loose brush strokes I wanted, the correct values. Just in general, I feel like I was hitting all the notes that I wanted to hit with it. I hope it was useful to see my process overall with this challenge that I set myself. It feels vulnerable to show you more behind the scenes stuff versus something a bit more polished. I like doing tutorial videos, but I also want to show you how I learn and how I set myself different goals and how I work to achieve them, even if the end results are not my best work. And I also make bad art too. I know it's all subjective. I'm not having a debate about what is good versus bad in art. I'm just saying that I think there's value in seeing how an artist develops and seeing their more mediocre stuff between some of the other stuff. And I really started this whole channel with the idea of showing my progress and journey as an artist. So I want to put out more content where I'm also learning alongside you and showing how I improve. So do let me know if this is of interest to you. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.